Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Tuesday, April the 22nd, and we're back from our own recess for a new season. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne, the podcast that gives you everything you need for the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes. And there is plenty going on both at home and abroad, something of a sugar rush of development stored up after the Easter weekend. But of course, the media will be dominated by just one story, the death yesterday of Pope Francis, Pope from 2013 until the announcement yesterday morning.
A Pope of many firsts and many surprises, the first leader of the Catholic Church from Latin America, from Argentina. Also a very political Pope who saw himself as a social reformer. He was prepared to step gingerly into arguments about the Church's position on women, on homosexuality, and picking many fights with the US administration on migration and refugees. This week, we'll see his body lie in state at the Vatican for mourners to pay their respects. Then the funeral, and after that, at the start of next month, the papal conclave, the global election, with a selectorate of just over 250 to determine who will be the Church's next leader of 1.4 billion Catholics.
And like so much elsewhere, Anne, the choice that the conclave makes will reflect the strains we see in global politics and in communities, changing demography of a global church, rapidly growing in Africa and Asia while declining in its traditional European heartland. And of course, as you just referred to, a massive ideological battle between those committed to what you might call Catholic dogma and those wanting to promote what you might call a more inclusive church. And that means that at the heart of that choice, there will, of course, as viewers of conclave, but also Catholics down the ages know that there is politics all at the heart of it. Just to take one tiny bit of politics that I think the late Pope engaged in. I was watching last night's coverage on Sky, and they had a piece from the Holy Family Church in Gaza, and Pope Francis actually phoned that church every night, even when he was in hospital, clearly making a statement there of solidarity with Catholics, but a statement that will have been noted by all participants in that conflict. And as you say, his clashes with the Trump administration were also notable. Donald Trump lowering US flags to half-mast, but that comes after Pope Francis in 2016 directly attacked Donald Trump's decision to build a border wall with Mexico. At the time, Pope Francis declared that a person who thinks only about building walls and not about building bridges is not Christian. So it will come down to those cardinals, of which 3 will come from the UK, which is the highest ever number.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that we had 3 cardinals at the moment. We will certainly see Donald Trump attend the Pope's funeral, though, of course, relations were scratchy between them. J.D. Vance, however, was, of course, the last person to see the Pope from the outside world, to see the Pope alive, Sam. I think it is a fair point to say that he put himself out there on the politics of not building walls, on migration, and he's going to be buried in a part of Rome where many new migrants to the city first settled. So he sent a signal even after death on that. But that is a sign, I think, of a very political Pope. I probably would, as a Catholic or born Catholic myself, enter a bit of a word of caution as we think about the legacy. You know, where does it leave the church in China? Where does it leave the church's legacy on the Ukraine war? That's much more contested, perhaps, about this Pope who believed in dialogue, but perhaps not so much in taking on the autocracies. It'll be interesting to see who attends from the UK when the Holy Father is laid to rest. Tony Blair is the most prominent Catholic convert, I would say, in British politics, married Cherie Blair, who was already a lifelong Catholic. Boris Johnson, I think a lot of us forget that he was baptised Roman Catholic, and he wed Carrie Slimmons in a Catholic ceremony. Keir Starmer, resolutely atheist, but we will find out today whether he will travel to Rome for that funeral.
I think Pat McFadden is probably the most senior Catholic member of Keir Starmer's government.
Yes, that's very true.
Whether or not the invite extends all the way to the Cabinet Office Minister, I don't know. Morgan McSweeney, his Chief of Staff, as well. I think Sue Gray, formerly his Chief of Staff, was as well. Irish Catholics have always played quite a role in Keir Starmer's administration, which has always been an interesting nuance. Anyway, there's no doubt images of the Basilica in the Vatican will dominate our TV screens and our playbooks for days to come, drowning out the politics that is going on. But go on, it will. We've got local elections a week on Thursday, which is why the government has announced their 750 pilots for breakfast clubs. That'll provide 30 minutes additional childcare for some parents. There's, of course, a row over funding to do with that. Meanwhile, the Home Office, and this is interesting, will publish the nationalities, a sort of nationality league table of those countries with the migrants where there is the highest crime rate. Now, Yvette Cooper has overruled officials to force the publication of this data by the end of the year, but they want us to know that it's coming today and that the Home Secretary has gone against the advice of her officials in order to supply it to us. But the biggest thing at the moment, and with one eye on the market and another on planes from London to Washington, is the IMF annual meeting this week. Rachel Reeves is heading out there for 4 days, and Rachel Reeves is lucky because you are also heading out there for several of those days for the IMF spring meeting, and it comes as if you tune into your Bloomberg terminals, you can see markets taking a battering because of the criticism of the head of the US Fed, the US equivalent of the Bank of England Governor Jerome Powell is facing growing pressure from the Trump administration. The markets don't like that. We're having another difficult day, but it's a big, big moment for Rachel Reeves. Do you want to just set out what's going on, what she's going to do and why?
Yes, indeed. I mean, I'm heading out just after Rachel Reeves to join that and watch that all unfold. Slightly less grand digs than the Chancellor, who is staying in the wonderful British residence of the embassy. I couldn't get a room in there. I don't know why. It's a sort of Davos, this, for the real grown-ups stewarding the global economy, Sam. It's a chance for Reeves to rub shoulders with the people that she really needs to keep on side, or perhaps still get over the line to get the big, beautiful trade deal with the Trump administration really moving forward. So on that, I'm hearing that we're not going to get any announcement this week, but that it's very important that everyone feels squared and that she is also, I suppose, has a message on the global economy, which speaks for Britain and the national interest. I'm sure we're going to hear that phrase. I bet you've heard it again in briefings, public and private. I certainly have again and again, that this is really all about British interests. At the same time, she does need to look as if she is not in some way oppositional to the position, and is a difficult position, of the Trump administration on tariffs. So to that effect, one of her main meetings will be with Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. That, I think, will be tonally very important. He has the ear of Donald Trump, really, as one of the people who I think will force the pen to paper, the ink quill of the trade deal to paper, if and when the time comes. And the question also is, will she be able to spend meaningful time as opposed to a brush by with Jerome Powell? As you point out, Sam, his head is seen by many to be on the block as Donald Trump targets the Fed and wants to see an interest rate slash to boost the economy. Powell is cautious on that. So there's a whole drama within the drama going on there at these IMF spring meetings. I think it's also for Reeves. She has a background at the embassy, indeed. She worked in the economics section in Washington. She's still not that well known on the international economic and finance circuit. And we tend to forget that because she's the UK Chancellor. But I've been covering this for quite a long time. And I think one of the things she's doing there, she's going to do a number of events in Washington. There's a big party on reception, I think we should call it. I call it a party on Thursday night. So I think she's keen to be seen, to be at the heart of the rooms where it happens, to quote the great line from Hamilton, and that she hopes that and the relationship that's warmed up so well with the Trump administration towards a trade deal will be enough to keep it rolling forward so that the next time she goes, the deal is there or nearly there.
One of the people she'll, of course, be relying on is the UK ambassador to Washington, Peter Mandelson. And of course, Peter Mandelson, Lord Mandelson, is personal friends with the person who's probably the most important that Rachel Reeves will see out there, which is Scott Bessent. I think they even used to holiday together, Mandelson and Bessent. So there is a strong link there. Therefore, I would expect the door to be kind of firmly open. But you can see the spin doctors in the Treasury needing to work quite hard for this event. If I was to sort of turn things on its head, because the danger for Rachel Reeves is that what she gets out of this 4-day period in Washington is a downgrade of the IMF forecast for the UK and nothing to show on trade talks. So there's a big moment today at 2:00. That's when the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, release what's called their World Economic Outlook, and that covers all countries, but including the UK. So we'll thumb towards that page straight away. And of course, it is all but certain in the near term to show a downgrade in the IMF's growth forecast for the UK. Remember, the OBR cut the 2025 growth forecast from 2% to 1%. So it seems inconceivable that in 2025, maybe 2026, that number doesn't go down. The OBR did push up growth in later years. So, I mean, quite possibly we will see an increase in growth. But expect this government to cling on to the very, very, very smallest percentage increase in growth as a win. I'm not sure that many economists would say that increases of, for instance, 0.1, 0.2% are great triumphs. But I mean, if it's up, it's up, and expect the government to make a lot of it. It'll also be interesting when we get this document at 2:00 to see whether the government pronounces on what it thinks this government is doing, in so much as it has a reform program. Has the IMF noticed attempts to unblock the planning system? Some of the ways it's treating public services, some of the ways it's dealing with taxation. Is there any language about the need to increase taxation in future? The IMF has often provided a complete curveball for governments by pontificating on how governments should run their public finances sustainably, running them into clashes with George Osborne, Philip Hammond, and other former chancellors who suddenly find that they are being told how to run things by the team over in Washington. It's a tricky moment for the IMF, though, because like the World Bank, the US could, and it's not one of the priorities at the moment, but could end up pulling out of this, like so many other global institutions. So things all feel a bit rocky. The one thing, there's one little trick, and watch Rachel Reeves do this. The one thing I think she'll want to say, and she's been saying it recently, is that she wants to be able to say the UK is still the fastest growing European G7 country. I'm going to read that again. Still the fastest growing European G7 country. Now, the G7 consists of 7 countries. There are 4 in Europe: France, Germany, Italy, and the UK. So all she is saying, if she is able to say that later today, is that the UK is growing faster than France, Germany, and Italy. So it's a big claim. It sounds grand, but it only means that we're ahead of France, Germany, and Italy. There are plenty of other European countries, I suspect, will end up growing faster than we do. So it's she will navigate a course. I think a cold-headed look by the time we finish her trip on what she came back with will be important. But frankly, Anne, as long as you're in the room for the party on Thursday night, that's a win.
Exactly. It's a multi-frock occasion. And it leads up to this big weekend in Washington of the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which is also that the whole political town is basically out of action for 3 days, just hobnobbing with each other. It's a really good point that you make about the IMF and its impact on chancellors, Sam, because the IMF has often been seen as being on the gloomy side with its prognoses, but it still has that kind of halo around it, doesn't it? Which I think goes back to that, Britain having to go to the IMF in the 1970s to be bailed out. So it still has, when the economy really did hit the rocks in the mid 70s. But there's also quite an argument in the Treasury and among, if you like, the very small trade union guild of chancellors and former chancellors about whether the IMF is too directional about economies where, frankly, it is a bit far away from their actual needs, and that I think you could say fairly sometimes the economy, even the British one, has outperformed its prognosis. But of course, if you go to Washington and you're around in those circles, that's probably not the moment at which you're going to say, I don't believe the IMF forecast. It's a very tricky area. When you think about the argument we have about the OBR, lots of people say, I don't agree with the OBR, or I think the OBR skews things in a certain direction. When it comes to the IMF, chancellors say that privately sometimes, but they never say it publicly. I'm just interested in that.
I think the way that chancellors deal with that is that they authorise their proxies, for instance, Labour MPs, to beat up the IMF rather than doing it themselves, or the Labour don't always jump to doing that in the way that the Conservatives did. But of course, none of this means anything because we're all having downgrades unless there can be some exemptions on to the trade war, which the US administration, to which Rachel Reeves is going to go on bended knee, is in some way relaxed. What are we hearing on that?
Well, we're hearing, yes, everything seems to be about downgrading today, doesn't it? But UK officials, I think, rather pessimistic about the chances of getting any exemption on that 10% global tariff of the Trump administration. That now seems to be nailed on there. But they do hope that they'll be able to agree reductions to the 25% rates, those sweeping ones, which really are potentially the death knell of so much industry and activity in the UK. One thing I am hearing, which is intriguing, is that there is no movement on anything in the deal that would affect food standards in the UK, which means that chlorinated chicken controversy seems, for the moment, for this government to be not something that they want to get into. They say they did make that commitment in the manifestos and that there would be no change there. So it does remove a small but significant negotiating point with the US side. But as I understand it, there is to be no change there. You can come and blame me if there is.
That seems consistent with what I've heard elsewhere, and there was a debate in government about whether or not to lower food standards, and they've come down on the side of not. But I don't think it's unalloyed good news for all our friends in the farming and food production industry, because although they might say there is no reduction in food standards, there may be some scope as part of a UK-US trade agreement to sort of in some way change the quotas. In other words, there would be an allowance for greater amounts of US food that adheres to UK food standards to enter the UK. All of this coming at a pivotal time because Rachel Reeves is not making that decision unilaterally in a vacuum. What we are hearing, and we have heard for quite some time, is that the UK is planning to sign up in perpetuity to EU food standards, not only as they are at the moment, but what's known as dynamically. In other words, as EU food standards change, that quite often just toughen, quite often take them further away from, for instance, US food standards, the UK in the future, as part of a big UK EU reset deal to be announced on May the 19th, that the UK will dynamically align, to use a horrible phrase, with EU food standards, which, to be really, really boring about it, Anne, was something that was specifically denied by Keir Starmer's team uh, 2 years ago ahead of the election. They said, we will not dynamically align on food standards. To me, I've got the messages. The spokesman did it. Maybe the spokesman's not there anymore, but they were still absolutely categorical. They weren't going to do what they are now about to do. And that is some of the thinking around what's going on, because what Rachel Reeves says in Washington this week is only one half of a discussion that's also happening with the EU on the other side. And part of that, and this is also a difficult discussion when it comes to the US, the UK want greater access to defence markets. That's according to the Times this morning. They want a slice of that defence budget that the EU's got, and they want to be able to tender for EU contracts. Now, of course, the UK and the US have had quite a lot of the defence industry locked up between them, and the UK's previously relied on the US. What's the US's view if the UK then seeks to sell more to the EU because it no longer thinks that the US is a reliable partnership when it comes to defence products? So there's quite a lot of difficult stuff. One more thing that will cause Rachel Reeves difficulty: it does look as if the UK is going to, and forgive the jargon, aligned to the EU carbon trading scheme. This is about a sort of tariff which allows goods to take account of the amount of kind of pollution that is and carbon that is generated in their manufacture. It's an intensely complicated thing. It looks as if the UK is going to sign up to that. Donald Trump is very hostile to the entire EU carbon trading scheme. So that's another complication that may or may not be a problem as the UK talks to the US.
And I've noticed that one question, shall we say, our friends of Rachel Reeves don't absolutely relish, Sam, is how congruent is the position on negotiating this US trade deal with, at the same time, a lot that's going on. And you've just given us quite a lot of insight there into behind the scenes of what's going on in terms of trying to align more closely with the EU. Anything that's about that direct comparison seems, if you like, to grind a few gears. And I think the hope is simply to quietly get on with doing both, then draw the dotted lines across and smooth off any rough corners. What I don't think they absolutely love is people saying, hey, do these things really fit together? Because when you're going off into a very reactive, as you know, very reactive on social media and otherwise Trump landscape, perhaps don't want to point out that at the same time you're dating the EU.
Well, it's not our job to be helpful. What is our job is to wrap up
Certainly
after
not.
about 20
Never.
minutes, and we are done. So let's stop making people's lives more difficult and let them get on with their day. Have a lovely time. Good luck with your flight to Washington, and we will hear from you stateside in 24 hours' time.
We will be making this podcast great again.